Hello and welcome back to the Goldster Inside Story. I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Emma Burstall, who is a novelist. You've written, I believe it's 9 novels. Is that right, Emma?
9 novels to date, that's right, yes.
And the latest one is The House on Rockaway Beach, which I've really enjoyed. So welcome to Goldster, Emma.
Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And tell us about how you got started with your writing career. Because I believe before you wrote novels, you were a journalist. Is that
I
correct?
was indeed, yes. So I started my career actually on a local newspaper in Devon called the Western Morning News, based in Plymouth. And I used to spend quite a lot of time, I covered the whole of Devon and Cornwall. So I'd spend quite a lot of time going, across the two counties, driving around in my sort of rather clapped out old red Mini. Then later I moved to London and I started writing for various national newspapers and then latterly women's magazines. And I was a features editor actually at the sort of towards the end on a magazine which sadly doesn't exist anymore called Family Circle, but listeners may remember the name. I had always, had this dream of writing novels. And then I got to about 40 and it was quite funny actually how it happened, but somebody who used to write for me on the magazine published a novel. And I'm not normally a jealous, envious person, but I remember thinking, because I used to sort of rewrite some of her copy and, I commissioned her to write pieces and I thought she was very good. Obviously, that's why I kept commissioning her. But I just remember thinking, if she can do it, then I can, And I sort of thought, if I don't start now, I never will. So while I was still on that job, doing that job, I started writing this novel, which became Jim and Slimline. And I joined a gym when my youngest child was 6 weeks old. A new gym had opened sort of down the road from where I live. And I was trying to sort of get back into some kind of shape after having a baby. And there was a brilliant creche there as well. So actually, I think I spent more time drinking coffees with the other mums while he was in the creche than I did actually working out. But that's another story. I just began to think, all the stories I would hear. I met a lot of new people, some of whom have remained very good friends to this day. And obviously over the course of the months, we swapped stories and I began to think what a great place actually to set a novel. A local gym, they were springing up all over the place back in 2008, I think it was published. So I got these 4 very different women, fictional women together and started to write this novel. And I remember I got about halfway through and I was so enthusiastic about it. And then I suddenly realised, having been a journalist and in the writing was my trade, I thought, of course I can write a novel, if I just get down to it. Suddenly about halfway through, I thought, no, actually, I've got the beginning and I've got the end, but I've got no idea how I'm going to sort of, what I'm going to do in the middle, how I'm going to get there. So I took myself off on a writer's course. It was just a long weekend, actually. It was a residential course, but I found it very helpful. It was a bit like going backwards because I started the novel rather than, anyway, and then I sort of, carried on, managed to finish it and found myself an agent, a lovely agent who's still my agent to this day, Heather Holden Brown. Well, I'd like to say the rest is history as if it all came very easily. But of course, like most authors, I had my fair share of rejections. But some of them were nice rejections, which I was told to, really value because they didn't need to write anything nice at all, really. And then eventually, I can't remember how much later, but I got a 2-book deal. And I was on holiday in France, actually, with my family when the call came through from my agent. And it was just that wonderful moment when they said they want not just this book, but another one as well.
Had you already got a second book in mind, or did you have to suddenly come up with a second book?
Well, no, I didn't really have a second book in mind, I must admit. And no, so I did have to, yes, but I made a few edits to do on the first book. So I had a bit of time, between finishing that one and then starting the other one. And that was for preface, which was part of Random House. And then when I started, then my editor actually, who's still my editor, switched over to Head of Zeus, which was a new publisher. So I started writing books for them. So the next one was The Darling Girls, and then I began I don't know what you call it, a quintet, five books in a series about Cornwall, set in a fictional Cornish fishing village. And well, it started off as sort of an idea for one book, and then it sort of gradually became clear that actually there was a lot more mileage in this. And of course, it was one of the joyous things about it is although Tremarnock was my fictional village and it was purely invented, and of course I had inspiration from various places I've went to in Cornwall, but it was quite joyous because I knew it quite well. I knew, having lived near there, you know, in Devon, and I wanted very much to write books that sort of got under the skin of the place, not just the chocolate box Cornwall, which of course is beautiful and a wonderful place to go on holiday, but there's a lot more to it besides. And you know, I hope I conveyed some of that, of sort of, you know, the hardships as well as the joys of actually living somewhere that's you know, really quite a long way from London, quite remote, that can get quite bad weather, and that's very, very busy in summer and sometimes very deserted in winter, you know. So yeah, that became the Tremarnock series.
When it turned into a kind of mini series, really. Is this
Yes,
something because you just loved the characters and you wanted to stay with them? I mean, was there
yes,
an element of that, oh, I don't want to let them go, I want to keep writing these?
absolutely. And as I sort of really got into my characters, you know, I felt very much that I wanted to keep the overarching story of Liz and her young daughter who moved to Cornwall from London when they're sort of rather down on their luck. But some of the other characters, I really felt as I was writing them, that I wanted to tell their stories more. And I suppose the joy about setting it in a Cornish fishing village as well is that if there's such a mix of people, you know, you have the locals who live there all the year round, and then you get the weekenders coming in with their sort of weekend homes, and then you get the holiday makers, and it's, you know, you just can get a really nice mix of people. So as I think, you know, each of my novels I try to make very much standalone, so you can read them on their own, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But if you want to know what happens to Liz and her family, you know, overall, you'll need to read all 5.
And do you miss those characters when you finished writing about them?
Yes, I felt quite bereft actually, but at the same time also ready to do something new. And I you know, always say that I may return to Tremarnock sometime, but I'm not ready to just at the moment. So I'm sort of launching off in a slightly different direction now with my house on Rockaway Beach, which is set on, well, actually in New York. And very few people associate New York, I think, with beaches. But actually, there is this peninsula called the Rockaway Peninsula, which sort of juts out at the base of Long Island. And on a good day, it's only about a 40-minute drive into Manhattan. On a bad day, it can be 2.5 hours, but hey ho, that's traffic for you. And there's also a ferry that takes you from Rockaway to Wall Street, which also takes about 40 minutes. And it's just a very interesting place. And I thought that would be a fun place to write a novel, and that's what happened.
So did you go out there? Did you know the Rockaway Peninsula yourself beforehand?
Well, I did indeed.
Inspired?
I have quite a lot of sort of inside knowledge because my sister and her husband have a beach house there, and in fact they raise their children there. They also live in Manhattan now, but they spend every summer there. And I used to go over for long periods of time, actually over the summer holidays with my children, you know, and the cousins would all play together, and it's heaven for them. I mean, absolute heaven. It started off when they were little as, you know, just beach and pool and fun games, and then as they got bigger, it became a bit more of a sort of anxiety inducing, because it's sort of party central Rockaway for teenagers in the summer. There's a big boardwalk and, you know, lots of interesting sort of stalls, drink stands and food from around the world and music. And so it would be like, oh my goodness, here we go, you know. And of course every evening we'd say, right, don't come back later than 10 or 11 or something. And then every evening I'd be going around patrolling the area in the car with my sister, trying to scoop up the teens, you know, but they loved it, they absolutely loved it. And actually this summer I will be going out there again with well, my daughter and my son, so 2 of my 3 children, and my 2 little grandchildren.
Oh,
Who've not
wonderful.
been there before.
And have your children read this? Does it resonate about their childhood spending time there?
Do you know, my eldest has read it, and yes, indeed. My 2 boys, I sort of despair of. I think they dip in and out, but I think they just think mum's novels are, you know, quite dull, not for them, all about women and families and things like that, you know. But yes, my daughter has indeed read it, and in fact does the audio book, which is rather fun because she's an actor, and
Oh,
she
fantastic.
reads, which is particularly nice for my mother. I have a very elderly mother who is rather visually impaired. You know, she has macular degeneration and can't see very well, so it's rather nice that she can listen to my books read by her granddaughter. Yeah.
Wow, that's really lovely to have that family connection.
Yes, yes, yes. No, it is nice.
It made me want to visit there. I've heard about the Rockaways, but I haven't, I've never actually been there. So I just thought it made me really want to go. So I think that's a very good thing when a book encourages you to do that.
Yes.
It made me laugh when you said about what a nightmare it was for teenagers, because I just thought, are you Gigi? Are you the mother who's constantly screaming at her children to get back?
Exactly.
It really made me laugh when you said that. I thought, oh yes, do you want to tell people about some of your characters? Because there's wonderful characters in this book.
Yes, well, Gigi is indeed, she's has an Italian background, and she's got various children who are always causing her problems. Her youngest one, they're not terrible children really, but they're just typical teenagers. And some of the stories do indeed. I always say nothing in my life gets wasted. Something will always come in that's, loosely based on something that's happened. And, obviously teenagers aren't allowed to drink alcohol in America. So it is a big deal. I think you've got to be over 21. And one of her sons grabs his dad's bottle of whiskey and runs off with it, causing his mum much anxiety. And she kind of tries to run after him over the sand dunes and is huffing and puffing and of course can't catch up. But she's got a real heart of gold, and she makes friends with my character Sophie, who is one of two sisters who inherit this big old sort of rattling house on the beach from their grandmother, much to their surprise. And they both go out there, one with a determination. Celia is determined to sell. She has bad memories of the house, interestingly. And Sophie, her older sister, is desperate to keep it because she remembers it very differently. So little by little, you start to find out about their stories and why it is that they seem to have such conflicting feelings about the place. So I hope there are some quite good local characters. There's this very old lady who lives up the road who's sits on her porch and watches the world go by, and she has a wealth of wisdom and information to impart, actually. And Sophie, my character, gets to know her as well. And then there's a very interesting, keen fisherman who comes in and out of the story, who has quite an interesting background himself, comes across as a bit of a sort of hippie type, but there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. And of course, it's all set against this backdrop of just miles of golden sandy beach, and such a mix of people, because it's very unlike somewhere, I think, like, say, the Hamptons, which I don't know very well, but you get people coming in, day trippers coming in to Rockaway, and there are public beaches and the more private beaches because you can't park there. So one end there's sort of quite a lot of blaring music and barbecues. The other end it's all a bit more families, but everyone seems to kind of mesh together in the summer and just have a great time. And they have lots of lifeguards up and down the beaches wearing bright orange gear. My nephew and my two nieces have been lifeguards over the summer, so that's another whole story. They get quite well paid, actually. They have to do these terrible drills, and very occasionally there'll be a sort of shark sighting, which is usually absolutely miles out to sea and not really a worry, but it still causes, as you can imagine, a lot of sort of minor hysteria and then laughy stories afterwards.
And so, have you had any response from local people in Rockaway? Do people like this book? Have you been invited to do any things when you're there?
Do you know, I'm going out in July because it's published in paperback here in April. At the moment, it's only out in hardback and ebook and audio. And in America, it's coming out in paperback in July. So I'm hoping, indeed, to do a few sort of bookshop tours and signings. And actually, my sister is very good she has her own book group. She's very good at sort of whipping up her book group girls and getting them to talk about it a bit. And I'll probably do a talk to them. I have done with some of my other books. They're very nice and supportive, and we always have some laughs about the divided by a common language, because there are certain words which they seem to find charming. English words like they'll say he put on his swimming trunks. What are swimming trunks? They'll say, and I say, what do they call them? Just swimsuits, I think, or bathing suits. There are lots of these funny little differences which are amusing, I think.
I teach American students, and sometimes it amazes me words that they've just never heard of and think are absolutely hilarious. I made a whole class just laugh for about an hour. They couldn't stop laughing. And teenagers get that kind of giggling fit because I ice lollies, and they thought it was the funniest thing. And eventually I said, "What do you call them?" And they said popsicles, and I said, how can you say that's not a more hilarious word? I mean,
I know, ice lollies. I remember having this, I must just say, this extraordinary conversation with a mother at my son's school, actually. I was having to make, my daughter was in some sort of Victorian play or something, and she needed a mob cap and a pinny. And I remember saying to this American mum, you know, who was living over here for a while, something about, yeah, I just don't know where I'm going to get this mob cap and pinny. And she looked at me, she said, excuse me? I just have no idea what you're talking about. I can't do the American accent, you know. But I suddenly thought, well, yeah, I suppose they are quite sort of unusual words, really. But to me, it made perfect sense, you know.
So when you're writing these characters, I'd love to know how you come up with them, because they're very believable, they're very likable. And I feel that they've got a lot of backstory to all of them. Do you spend ages plotting their backstory? Do you know them intimately? How does it work when you come up with a character?
Well, actually, you know, I do a bit of backstory. I'll make notes about sort of who they are, where they come from, what their childhood was like, and so on, particular sort of distinctive features. But I would say, you know, they talk about people either being a plotter or a pantser or whatever. You know, you either plot your novels and your characters very carefully, or you fly by the seat of your pants. I would say I'm somewhere in the middle, but I definitely feel my way through the characters. So I'll have this idea at the beginning, and I would say it's a bit like having a coat hanger, and I will have some bits of people that I've come across, you know, met wherever, you know, just in life generally, and I'll have an idea of some aspects of them, you know, whether it's somebody who's very annoying or somebody who's a terrible worrier or whatever it might be. But then, and I know where they live and so on, and how they're going to come into the novel. And then it's very much sort of instinctive, feeling my way. And there are moments when I think, well, I was planning for this character to do something. And then I think, no, actually, he or she just wouldn't do that. You know, that's not in character. So, yeah, I would say I get to know them very well by the end. And I very much feel that they're real. And I suppose they are, in truth, based on, you know, my life experiences. But with lots of a huge sprinkling of imagination thrown in. So
let's go back a little bit to Jim in Slimline. How do you think your writing practice has changed, if indeed it has, since you came up with that first novel?
Well, I do remember with Jim and Slimline, going back to what I was saying before about being a journalist, that I thought that it would be easier than it actually was, because I think my writing then, initially anyway, was a little bit staccato. You know, I'd sort of got into the way of, you know, I was used to write as a child, and I always loved writing stories at school and so on. And but then as a journalist, you're trained to kind of cut all that colour out, really, unless you're lucky enough to be doing a lovely colour piece, you know, but often it's just, no, get rid of all the unnecessary words and adjectives and so on. And it was actually quite difficult to get them back in, you know, there. And I almost had to kind of like breathe and relax into it when I was doing my second draft, thinking, I can take more time, you know, this is the luxury, I've got the luxury, you know, I'm not talking about flabby writing where there's unnecessary detail, but I can actually, you know, and need to expand here, and you know, so I would say it's got more flowing, probably, and actually it's a long time since I've, you know, looked at Jim and Slimline, and I hope I would still find it entertaining and interesting, but I think my writing style has changed. I think that was a faster book, you know, that the prose was faster and it was more, maybe more punchy, I'm not quite sure, whereas I think I'm a bit more flowing now.
And do you still write journalism?
I haven't for quite some time. That said, actually, I did, you know, occasionally around kind of book promotion time, dare I say it, I will do some pieces, you know, usually for, yeah, the local newspaper and things like that.
And do you find it difficult now, because you were talking about the change in your style from journalism to novel writing? Is it difficult to go back and write articles and try and remember to take out those extra words and to try and really pare it down?
Not really, but I think I would have trouble doing a news story, probably. You know, I tend to write features, and you know, that's easier. And I suppose also, you know, it's a bit like riding a bike, that you know, when you've had a lot of experience, it sort of comes back quite quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I must admit, I sometimes sort of miss some of those lovely interviews that I used to do occasionally with, you know, well-known people. And I thought the wonderful thing about journalism, well, there were many wonderful things about it, was that access that you get, you know, to people that you would never ordinarily really meet or come across, whether, you know, from dustmen to duchesses or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just, yeah, you know, there's not enough room in life, you know, you can't do everything. So
So tell us a little bit about the Darling Girls. I thought this early description: 3 women, 1 man, and a tangle of lies. What was it
yeah.
about, and how was it inspired? Because it's very intriguing.
Well, I have to be a bit careful here because obviously all my novels are total fiction, but I did come across a scenario which absolutely fascinated me, where there was 1 man and 3 women. That's really all I knew. I knew very little else about the story, but that got me thinking. You know, often with my novel ideas, they'll just be the seed of something that I'll overhear. And then I start thinking, God, I wonder how that works, and what must he be like, you know, and how do they cope? And so I ended up, you know, inventing these 3 very different women again, but who all had their own lives really, with this particular very charismatic character. And I like the fact that, you know, for me, the fact that it had some basis in truth kind of gave me the I suppose almost the confidence then to write about it, because it could seem like such a an unbelievable story, but it you know, it's not actually. You know, these things can happen, and truth is stranger than fiction.
It really is. And so frequently you meet people and hear their life story, you think, if I put that into a novel, people would say
that's so far-fetched. Exactly, that would never happen. Yeah,
the number of times that coincidence happens in life is extraordinary. But again, people get really cross if there's coincidence in novel. I mean, I know when, you know, the Detective Club set up, for example, that was one of their tenets of no coincidence, and yet you think that happens so often.
yes. Yes, it's so true. Yes.
You made the male character a world famous conductor.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something, because are you very musical? Is this something you felt you knew the world, or was it just something where you felt this would be a masterful personality and it would go well with being a conductor?
Well, I have a friend who's a very good cellist, although she's retrained as an architect, and her husband is a conductor. And I used to walk to school quite often. We had children of the same age, and we'd walk to the same primary school together, and I'd chat with him. And actually, he's the complete opposite of my conductor in the Darling Girls. I mean, he is charismatic, and he is obviously brilliant at his job, but he's also quite self-effacing, and definitely doesn't have loads of women on the go. But I suppose that's what gave me the idea, really, listening about, you know, about his life and how much traveling he does, and, you know, how many opportunities. I needed him to have a job where it would be possible, you know, the opportunities could arise. And I was interested, I suppose. So I'm not very musical. I learned the piano as a child, but that was about it. But I'm interested in that world, and I was interested in stories that they tell about that world. And when my friend was a professional cellist as well. I think it's a hotbed, actually, of all sorts of activities, as far as I can make out, when they go on tour, you know.
So let's go back to you just mentioned schools, walking your child to school, and I know that recently you've had a bit of a writing break, haven't you? Tell us what you've been doing and why.
Well, I have. So this job actually sort of more or less landed in my lap. A friend of mine had been working at this secondary school around the corner from where I live since it was since its inception. It's only 8 years old, and she used to talk about it, and I was rather I was interested in the stories, and, you know, it was a one form entry to start with, and now it's got all, you know, they've gone all the way up, and the first cohort took their A levels, and actually it's doing very well. It's a very, very good school, comprehensive school. She just happened to mention that they were absolutely desperate for people in the HR department that they've been trying to recruit. And I sort of come to the end of Rockaway Beach, and I just thought, you know what, you know, I've been writing book after book for a long time now, and this would be, I knew that they just wanted somebody, particularly for the summer or the spring, really, because this is a big time for recruiting new members of staff, and also exam invigilators. That's the other thing. Anyway, I went along. It was just a very informal interview, and the next thing I knew is that they were handing me my staff lanyard, and I'm now going into the school. It's called the Kingston Academy, and I'm just doing 3 or 4 days a week there at the moment. And as I say, it's just a temporary thing, and once I finish, probably at the end of April, I think I'll finish May. Then I will go back to my novel writing. But quite good, actually, just to get out of you know, out of that zone, you know, and be meeting people again. And I must say, I mean, you know, the people I've met in the HR department are absolutely fascinating, you know, lots of stories to tell. And it's very international, and we have quite a laugh, and there are some very boring aspects as well, as you can imagine, but and it's not something I'd done before. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'd recommend it actually, if you know, for any writers who are thinking, oh gosh, you know, I just need to do something a bit different, and sort of almost like refresh or press a reset button or something. That's what it feels a bit like.
And it's obviously worked. So do you think your brain was just at the point when you thought, I've written 9 novels and I
A
can't
little
do
bit.
this for a while?
A little bit, and I wasn't really too sure about what to do next. Well, I'm not going to go into it now, but I do know what I'm going to do next now. It's all very exciting, but I'm mulling still, very much mulling. Yeah, and I think I just needed a little bit of time away from it, really. So I'm glad I did it. Bit of a shock though, because it's an 8 till 5 job, and I haven't done that for goodness knows how many years. So if I look a little bit weary, it's like, oh my goodness. And yeah, just getting up and getting out, and you know, I know a lot of people who do everyday jobs like that will think, what is she fussing about? But initially, at least, I was a bit like, oh my goodness, you know.
And so do you think you've been collating stories in the back of your mind while you've been there? Do you think it's being in that atmosphere of young people? Does it?
Always, yes, yeah, there's always stories, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you feel the same as a writer, but I just find people endlessly fascinating, and what motivates them, and you know, everyone is light and shade, and just trying to work out, you know, think about their backgrounds. And I mean, there's a fascinating lady who I'm working with from China, and I realized that actually, you know, she's lived here for the last 15 years, but I knew so little about China other than what I read in the newspaper, you know, but her talking about her childhood and what her life is like for her parents there now. They live in Wuhan actually, yeah, it's just fascinating. So I'm sure, I'm not saying I'm going to have a Chinese lady, that would be pushing it too far, but do you know what I mean? It's just all these different ideas that you get when you're out in society, I suppose, rather than shut away in your study, you know.
And you used an interesting word I'd love to go back to. You said at the moment, I'm just mulling.
Yes.
And so important for the writing process. Could you talk us through that? Because we all know that actually physically sitting down and writing isn't the whole thing. Can you tell us about what your process is?
Well, as I think I said, it usually starts with just like the little seed of an idea. And so I remember with my first Tremarnock book, the seed of my idea was a stolen lottery ticket. Now, I can't remember why that came about. Maybe I'd read something in a paper about some, you know, maybe, but I just sort of thought, oh, a stolen lottery ticket, how would that be? God, what would you do, especially if it was somebody, you know, and then I started to think, where would it be good to set it? Where I like to set things in places that I know fairly well, you know more about than just the externals. So I started to think about where to set it, and then I start to think about my characters, and just lots of ideas swirl around, and quite often I'll be just out and about, you know, in the supermarket or something, and I realize I'm thinking about it, and then I will start to just scribble a few things down in a notebook, and actually start to get a bit excited. But probably my least favorite bit, I don't know about you, but is actually writing a synopsis. I hate synopsis writing, because I suppose that's the point when it all has to kind of hang together. And I've been quite enjoying kind of going off in my flights of fancy. But when it actually comes to putting pen to paper and saying, this is what I'm going to write, you know, and you realize you've got to think about things really rather more carefully and how it's all going to hang together. And I'll probably do a 3 or 4 page synopsis, something like that. Some people do much longer ones. And then hopefully my editor, my agent will love the idea, and off I'll go. And I don't plot every chapter, you know, I know what's going to happen to who and how it's going to, you know, end. But within that, I do a lot of wandering around the house, a bit like a lost soul, thinking, now, how am I going to explain this? You know, what happens to make her do such and such, or and of course that's all part of the fun as well.
Yeah.
And things can go off sometimes, and I have to be careful. Am I going off at too much of a tangent, or is this really, pull myself back in?
And when you work with an editor, do you have one specific editor that you work with?
Rosie de Courcy, who has been my editor since my very first novel. She's the one who picked me up, as it were. And she is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She's very experienced. She's edited all sorts of people, from Penny Vincenzi to Maeve Binchy to, she's doing who's the MP now, who writes lots of books, the Conservative MP, Lynn, anyway, I'll remember in a minute. But she she's quite brilliant and very very sort of precise, and usually when she comes back with her comments, I'll feel absolutely furious, because sometimes
always yeah
yes, I'm absolutely furious. I can't believe she's saying that she wants that character not for this not to happen to that character, and I'll sort of, quite often there'll be radio silence for several days or even up to a week, when I'll be sort of pacing around feeling cross. And then I have a think about it. And then 9 times out of 10, I think actually she's right. And I go back and I do what she's recommended. I have argued, and she will listen if I argue. But no, she's very, very good. And she's a great one for cutting out the flannel. Because I was saying originally I was a bit staccato, and then obviously I've been more expansive latterly, and sometimes she'll sort of, I'll see a page and actually she's, all it's got is the top paragraph and then the bottom paragraph, and she's cut out the whole thing in the middle, and I think, how brilliant, how did she see that? But actually it flows so much better, so.
And that is the joy of the editing process. And I know we've had quite a few authors who've been frustrated that editors no longer really edit. They expect an entire complete manuscript to come in. And it's a real joy when I talk to an author like you. And in fact, I interviewed an author at Hatchards in Piccadilly last night who was also saying how amazing his editor was, and what a process she took in the book.
Yes.
And it's so good to hear that there are still a lot of
editors like that. I mean, I think she's probably a dying breed, but she absolutely is, and she doesn't have a huge number of authors on her books now. And I think she really takes care with with her work, and it's invaluable. I mean, I used to edit. I know how important it is, and I think that's probably an advantage of being a journalist, is I used to edit people's copy as a features editor all the time, and I just know how everybody's work can be improved by a second pair of eyes, and so I've never felt too precious about having taking things out or whatever.
Well, I'm going to go back to your actual writing process, as in, what do you do in terms of when you get the book? How long do you have to write this book, and what is your schedule like when you're in the middle of writing it?
Okay, so well, it's usually sort of between 9 months and a year, and that includes generally includes mulling, thinking time. So normally, once I've kind of done the synopsis and we've agreed what I'm going to write, it'll be about 9 months. And I usually start off saying, right, I'm going to do sort of 4 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. So in a relatively sort of leisurely pace, fitting in my nice runs with girlfriends, my cups of coffee and things. And then as the time gets closer to publication day, it all becomes a bit more frenzied, and quite often I'll either take myself off to the library and do big days there. It sort of depends, but definitely I up the ante as as my deadline gets closer. But I do try and have a life as well. I know some writers are absolutely prolific and seem to manage to kind of produce 2 books a year and things, and good on them, amazing. But actually, I've got lots of other things going on as well. So it's just, I don't want to do it at quite that pace.
And I think one of the things that we all learn as writers, and indeed I definitely learned doing this job for Goldster, interviewing so many fellow authors, is how every single writer has a different pattern. There is no one size fits all. Some people have to write every day, even if it's only 20 words. Some people just like to take, weeks off or months off, or the book every 10 years. And there's no right or wrong. It's like anything, it's what works for you. And I think sometimes there's a real pressure, isn't there, from the publishing industry as a whole, that you have to conform, you have to do. Now, I know, spoken to romance authors particularly, who have to produce a summer book and a Christmas book.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and I think that pressure is extraordinary. And we've had authors on who've said, I spend all of my summer thinking about Christmas and then all of my winter thinking about summer.
Yeah.
My seasons are so messed up.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's just too much. And the other thing is, I don't know whether you agree, but actually, it's not particularly healthy to be sitting at a desk at your computer for hours and hours and hours and hours on end, actually. And also, obviously, the writing process when you're in the groove is wonderful and there's nothing like it. But, you're not going to get your ideas that way either. And I think you need to live and have experiences and travel and meet people, because all of that will inform your books,
Absolutely.
So, but absolutely, if somebody's able to write solidly all day every day, good on them. But I think I'd just sort of seize up, have to get my yoga classes in.
You do yoga. Do you have other things that particularly help you? Because there is definitely a problem with anyone who sits at a desk for hours every day.
I know.
My neck and shoulders whenever
Terrible.
I go to massage, say, what have you been doing to yourself? Is there something that you do that helps you with that?
Yoga, Pilates, it's those stretching things, a bit of swimming. Sometimes I'll go and get a massage or see a physio. I've had periods of seeing physios and they just, repeat what I know already, but sometimes fail to do, which is do the stretches and get up every sort of 15, 20 minutes and have a walk about. And but it's hard, and particularly you forget, or I forget, unless I set an alarm, which I don't really like doing, I forget that 20 minutes has gone by and I should, or half an hour, and I should get up and have a walk about because I'm really in the throes of something.
It's very hard, isn't it? When there's a thing where you can set on your computer that will, blank it out every 50 minutes or something. And I think, but if you're in the middle of a sentence, I can't do that. What if you're in the middle of a sentence?
I know. Yeah.
But it's probably a great idea to do it, but I'm always nervous of losing that elusive idea, that moment, that sentence that you were just working on.
Yes And I love walking actually as well. I mean, that's obviously not so good for neck and shoulders and all of that, but it's just getting out in the fresh air, I think is very good as well. And I tend to go with group of girlfriends. We've been doing it for years actually. We sort of stomp around Richmond Park, usually near where I live, and it's lovely. It's really nice. It's sociable as well as good for us. So
reading The House on Rockaway Beach, one of the things that really struck me was the connection with nature, and you made me want to swim in the sea. I haven't done it for a few months, and I'm really longing to get back into it. And do you feel that when you're writing, or was this just because you wanted to write about your character Sophie, or is that something that you feel a connection with? I
absolutely adore swimming in the sea. It's just one of my things. Since I was a child, actually, my grandmother lived in Sussex by the sea, and we would go there in the summer a lot. And I never remember it being cold. It must have been. I mean, British summers, you get 1 in 4 you'd get a heat wave or whatever, but I never do. As a child, we just spent hours on the beach, swimming and building sandcastles and so on. And I've always loved it. I mean, I love seawater most of all, but I do like wild swimming in lakes and ponds, and even the River Thames, actually, weirdly, which some people think is very bizarre. But I do, particularly last summer, I was swimming quite a lot in the Thames, trying to find the sort of cleaner bits, keeping my mouth shut. But I think it's becoming more popular, actually.
Yes, definitely is.
Yes, and I just love that feeling of it's so much better than being in a swimming pool, and it's just being out there and in the Thames, sort of swimming past the ducks and things. It's just wonderful. Absolutely love it. It's invigorating, and it's my happy place. Being in water is, preferably the sea, is my happy place, definitely. So it's not a coincidence that lots of my books are set by the sea, I think.
So going back to your very first novel, it came out, I think, in 2008.
Yes, I think it was, or 2009. I think it was 2008, yeah.
And you said you were in your 40s then, so it's a decade and a half now. What's it like now? You mentioned you've got grandchildren, you've fairly recently become a grandmother. What do you think life is like compared to when you were writing in your 40s, and you're writing in your 50s or 60s now, and you are just looking at what's happening ahead? How has your writing career changed in that time, and what have you learned?
Gosh, yes, it's funny because I think looking at 40, I remember sort of thinking that it was very much when I turned 40, a big moment and a big time of change. And in fact, I had my 3rd child when I was 40, so it wasn't a sort of classic thing. But I suppose if I'd thought then, about being the age I am now, I perhaps would have imagined that things would have slowed down. I don't know. Or and actually, I don't feel any different, really. You know, that's the truth. Obviously, I know I look different, but and I think it annoys me sometimes when I sort of read, particularly, you know, in the press and so on, the sort of pigeonholing of people. I mean, I'll confess, I am 61 now, and I find it quite hard to say because I can't believe that. But you know, how do you ever get there? I couldn't believe when I was 40 or 50, and I sort of still get the feeling that people think, you know, oh, 60-year-old grandmother, you know, and it's not that I mind. I'm thrilled with being a grandmother, you know, but my life is nothing like sort of what I think is the stereotypical, you know, pottering in the garden and having cups of tea. Well, actually, I do like drinking lots of tea, but I don't do enough pottering in the garden. And actually, you know, so I've got, they used to talk about the sandwich generation as being having older parents and then younger children. Well, I've got a 91, nearly 92-year-old mother, and then I've got my 3 children, and then I've got 2 grandchildren. And it was Mother's Day, obviously, last weekend. And so
Club sandwich generation.
Sorry?
The club sandwich generation.
Yes, it's true. I know all of them, all with differing needs and all much loved, and you know, but the only thing about that is that somebody pointed out, you know, that so 3 generations of mum, but it was, funnily enough, it was only middle mum, i.e. me, who was actually doing any work, you know, just looking after everyone at every end, you know, and it's quite hard, you know, and then sort of trying to carve out, you know, obviously time for me to have my own career and see my partner and see my girlfriends, you know, and yeah, it's busy, really busy. And it just sort of annoys me sometimes when I get the feeling that people think, oh no, you know, you're not doing anything when you get to your 60s or whatever. It's just not the case.
If you look back at, say, your own grandparents' lives at the same age that you are now, how do you think that life has changed, particularly for women in that time?
Well, I think it's changed enormously. I mean, I think, you know, I've got a picture actually of my grandmother, my father's mother, who had him at 35, and she looked, and it's not just about looks, I'm not being as shallow as saying that, but I mean, she did look like your stereotypical granny at 35. She had sort of iron grey hair in a bun and sort of rather severe clothes. And, you know, you'd have thought that she was the grandmother and not the mother at 35. But so but it isn't just about looks. It's also, I think, you know, women now at 40, they could be, you know, in a big career, maybe just having their first baby, or they could be a grandmother. I think our options are so much broader now than they used to be. You know, you can delay having your families, you can, and also the job market. You know, people used to go into one job and stay in it. So my grandmother was a teacher, my grandfather was an accountant. I think he retired at 60 probably. And whereas now people tend to not stick with just one career, but they have several careers and they move in and out of them. And then obviously now as well, there's even more flexibility with more working at home. So, you know, it's less usual, I think, to sort of say, right, I'm going to retire at 60 or 65. A lot of people, I think, I sense just sort of wind down a little bit, or, you know, work more from home, but they still carry on working. And I mean,
we've got a comment here.
Sorry, I was just going to say healthcare. It's quite extraordinary that, you know, my mother's generation, her boyfriend, incidentally, my father died some 15 years ago, sadly, and they'd been married a long, long time. But then she met up with somebody who had been her first ever boyfriend. Wow. And he is now 96. And they are having a grand romance, lovely, lovely time. They've been together about 8 years. And no, it's fantastic. And in fact, today they're in a hotel in Midhurst in Sussex, the pair of them, you know. So, I mean, obviously they're very lucky and not everybody stays healthy and lives as long as that, you know, but it is astonishing how much longer we are living if we're lucky enough and we look after ourselves. And, you know, so I think we need to think more long-term, really, about our lives and about how we want to spend the later years, I suppose.
And we had a comment here from someone which is beautifully witty. She says, indeed, as an older person, you must be sitting around waiting for the phone to ring or the doorbell to go, willing and able to drop everything. Pauline, I sense that's touched a nerve somewhere. And I wonder if you're one of those people whose children expect them to just babysit at the drop of a hat. I hear this a lot from friends, how frustrating it is, and people just assume. My mother always used to say, you know, all her friends would say, my friends, my children just assume that I've got no life and I can just look after their children at a moment's notice.
I know, mind you. I mean, I was a bit guilty of that myself. I do remember when mine were little, my mother had quite a busy you know, social life, and used to play quite a lot of golf with girlfriends. And sometimes I'd be having, you know, I was working in an office and one of the children would be unwell or something. I think, oh, how am I going to cope? You know, the nanny won't come or whatever. And I do remember saying to her once or twice with, you know, with a smile, but it was only a half joke, saying, you know, why aren't you sitting around knitting? You know, what are you doing going off with your friends and playing golf and going on holiday? You know, and I think that was captured beautifully in that TV series Motherland, wasn't it? With I don't know if any of you saw that, but
no.
yeah, there was a very amusing grandmother in that who was always bobbing down behind the sofa when she saw her daughter turn up, obviously trying to dump the children on her.
You mentioned the word retirement, and what do you think about retirement? Would you ever retire? I mean, as writers, do we retire?
I imagine I'll just sort of gradually sort of probably fade away. My novels might just get sort of, you know, they might take longer to write. And I don't think I'll ever formally retire. I don't like the word either. I mean, I can't think of something better. But it sounds like, you know, you're retiring from life. And actually someone once said to me at a party who retired very young, in his early 50s, I think, because he could. And he said, "Oh, I haven't retired. I've re-entered life," or something. And I thought, well, that's quite nice, you know. So I don't know.
I've actually had a comment that's come in. They've said it's like leaving your life, and that's really true.
Yes.
You know, the word retirement, as you say, is it's a very interesting word, and I haven't really thought about before how negative the connotations of the word retirement are. Living in retirement is like being a hermit, isn't it?
Yes. And actually, people I know who have retired, you know, most of them are having a lovely time, and they're, you know, busier than ever. But yeah, we need to find a new word for it. I'm not sure what that would be, but
I'm going to put that out to the Goldster community. What are your thoughts on retirement and the word retirement at all? So your mother is in her 90s, as you said. What do you think you've learnt from her about keeping your mind curious while aging?
She's amazing, you know, because she's, you know, got this terrible sight now, and her walking's not great, but she's sharp as a tack. She still does the crossword with her partner because he's got good eyes and she's got good ears, and his ears are bad and her, you know, so between them, it's like Jack Spratton's wife or something. I know. So he reads out the crossword clues and she tries to come up with the answers. And they still do a lot of gardening. They both love gardening. They both love listening to music. And actually, I said this to her quite recently. I think she is a fantastic role model because, you know, getting older, it is, as I see it, there's a lot about loss, you know, losing your sight, losing your ability to do the things that you once loved doing, some of those things anyway, physical things. But she's always made a point of trying to enjoy the things she can do, focus on the things that she still can do, you know, so she can still listen to music, even though she can't see. She can listen to audiobooks, she can garden, you know, she has a what do you call it? She calls it her 4-wheel drive. She's got a Zimmer frame thing now, and which incidentally my two-year-old grandson thinks is absolutely marvelous. It's a grandma's wheelie. He likes riding on it. You know,
my father had a mobility scooter, and the grandchildren, my sister's children, used to love it, and they'd get the chance to sit on his knee while he drove around, and then when they got a bit older, he'd let them drive it. They just thought it was the best thing.
Yeah, absolutely. They love it. Yeah, I mean, Louis, he's called, the 2-year-old, will come around here just to have a go on grandma's wheelie. You know, it's great.
I think that's important. I really love that, what you said about enjoying the things you can still do.
Yes.
And that is crucial because, you know, as we age and we start to lose some ability, and that's what we tend to focus on, isn't it? The negativity.
Yes.
And that's just what the media always focuses on. As you said, people, you know, it doesn't matter what they're doing in life, if they're a grandmother, and it's always Southern grandfather. It's very, very optimistic in the media.
Yeah.
There's a grandmother, and that connotation that goes, like the words bachelor and spinster. Bachelor always has
yes, great fun, you know.
And
Wine, women and song, the Bachelor,
Yeah.
that's the image it conjures up, whereas a spinster is a sad old wizened thing, isn't she?
And yet all the surveys show, I remember when I was working as a journalist, and we would constantly, every year we'd get a happiness survey in that people would write about, and every single time it would show that the happiest people were single women, followed by married men, followed by married women, with the unhappiest group being single men. And that was repeated.
How interesting.
The result of the survey, and yet that's never ever reflected in popular culture or the media or social media.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. That is fascinating. Well, I can believe it. Some of the single women I know have a wonderful time and no worries about the children.
Well, no, that's very true. I look at my friends and I think, oh, I dodged a bullet there. That's not to say that my friends don't adore their children. They do. But sometimes I think, now we've had a couple of comments in here. We've had a few thoughts about retirement. I've been retired for 16 years. I love the freedom it gives me. Teenage grandchildren keep me young, and I love to travel. So that just sounds
brilliant. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yes.
Someone else has suggested that instead of retirement, we should become a third ager. Love that one.
Yes.
And a great one here. Interesting thought. Why does there have to be a word at all? We are all still adults, just like anyone over 18. Good point, my Jane. Yes. Absolutely.
Yes, and actually that brings me to something. I remember having a conversation with my father, bless his soul, before he died. Actually, he said something about in my day we did such and such, and I said, don't use that word in my day, because now is your day. It's your day until the day you drop dead. It's all of our days, isn't it? Yeah. So I try not to use that one. Yeah.
And there are certain things perhaps that when we hear someone else say, we think, oh, yes, that is negative, or that's that, and realize that actually there's perhaps a mindset that we've got into. So perhaps that's something else we should all be doing as we enter our third age. Thank you for that. That perhaps that we should all be aware of, breaking those negative patterns.
Yes, and probably being open always. I mean, I hope I will be to new things. So if you find that because your walking's bad, you can't walk as you used to, go on big hikes or whatever, then try out the, I don't know, aqua aerobics or something, or be open to new experiences for as long as you possibly can, and also to meeting new people, because I think that's the other thing that my mother certainly is a good role model for this, because she's made new friends all the way through her life, really, and a whole new set now that ever since she's been seeing this chap in Surrey. She's got a new set of friends with him as well, and it's lovely, really lovely.
And that takes me back to something that I really loved on The House on Rockaway Beach. So your two main characters are the sisters Sophie and Celia, and they're very different, extremely different, and that's something that you explore throughout the book. But while Celia doesn't like the intrusiveness of people saying, oh, you so-and-so's grandchildren, all his grandchildren, what are you doing back here, and what are you doing? Why they're so nosy, why can't they just leave us alone? We're just sorting that.
Yes.
And there you have Sophie, who meets all these new people and makes lovely friendships at Rockaway, and so engages in the community. And it did make me think about how many challenges and how many wonderful challenges there are through traveling and through going to new places, but it's all to do with the people that you meet and the way you respond to those situations. When you were writing about them, with Sophie and Celia being sisters, how did you go through the dynamic of that when you realized that you wanted them to have this great difference, and you want there to be, secrets and lies in the family that they're both dealing with in their own way? Was that something that you felt very, very strongly about, or did they just suddenly appear in your head and you thought, oh, they're my sisters that I need to sort out why they're warring?
Well, I suppose going back to what I was saying about sort of all of life experience comes in somehow. I have a wonderful relationship with my sister. She's 3.5 years older than me. Our children have kind of grown up together despite being on different continents, and in fact she's coming over next week. But it wasn't always like that. When we were children, it was quite tricky, and particularly when we were teenagers, there were a lot of arguments, and it was quite some time, actually. I think it sort of almost took for us, when we started having children, really, for us to kind of re-find each other in a better way. And I think it's to do with aspects of our childhood and parenting and so on, and also just being very different characters. And so I suppose that did inform my writing a bit, and also the fact that Yes, so my sister, and she wouldn't mind me saying this, she was quite a rebel at school. We went to the same school, secondary school, and she was a rebel and got into trouble. I mean, she did very well ultimately, but, caused my parents lots of angst, I think. And, whereas I was a goody-goody, and I think that was partly in response to seeing my parents, worrying about my sister. And I'm sure she found me enormously annoying. It was like, Horrid Henry and Perfect Peter or whatever. I mean, it's raging, I've done my homework now. I didn't really mean to be like that, but it was just sort of in my nature to be conscientious as well, I think. And I've thought about that, and we've laughed about it, subsequently. And in fact, she used to enrage me by saying that when I was little, I wanted to grow up. When I said, I claimed that when I grew up, I wanted to be a nun. Well, I don't remember this at all. I don't think I ever said that. The funny thing is now that she was giving some talk at her local church. She sort of goes to church fairly regularly these days. Oh, times have changed. Who's the nun now? But anyway, as I say, we do get on very, very well. But it took a little while, and I suppose I just I thought it would be interesting to explore that a bit further. I am aware that some siblings are estranged, and but also that there's that tie, that bond. There was a quote actually that I used in one of my books, I think, where brothers and sisters are with us from the beginning to the end of time, or something. That's not the exact quote, but it's so true. That. That no one sort of knows you in quite that way other than your parents, obviously, and you want to get on with them. Of course you want. I think most people, it'd be very unusual if somebody said, well, actually, I really want to be estranged from my sibling.
Yes. Well, and we've had a comment here that says the book sounds like me and my sister as children, and we're the best of friends now, which
that's interesting. Yes, interesting. There's a lot of rivalry. I mean, I see it now with my little grandchildren. It's so interesting. That when the baby came along, little Clover she's called, and Louis, having been on his own for 2 years, they're exactly 2 years apart, and he found it really difficult. He's absolutely fine now, loves her to bits, but you could just see that he was really his nose was really put out of joint, and it's not surprising. It's a bit like
Sure.
Someone saying, I love you so much that I'm going to get another one just like you, sort of thing.
That's a really good point. I love that. Emma, thank you so much. You have been a wonderful guest. I have put, for those of you who are here live, I have put links to Emma's books in the chat. But for those of you who are watching later or listening on the podcast, her website is www.emmaburstall.com, and that's Burstall. And I have put links to bookshop.org, but you can buy them from all good bookshops and online. I'm just going to tell briefly before we finish, I'm going to tell everybody what is coming up on Goldster the next few days. So tomorrow I am back with Annie Domingo. She's a debut novelist, and I bumped into her last night. She came to my event I did at Hatchard. She's an absolute powerhouse, extraordinarily fascinating woman. She's an actor, a theatre director, and her debut novel is called Breaking the Marfa Chain. Maafa, and this is an African word for slavery. Takes the readers back to the 19th century. Two sisters are captured and sold separately into slavery. They end up in two different countries with opposite slavery laws. Faith ends up in America, where slavery is still legal and slaves don't have any rights. Sarah, and this is based on a real person, ends up in Victorian England and as the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. She's done some fascinating research, and Sarah Forbes Bonetta was a real historic character. So it's based on truth as well. And then next week I am back. It says on the website it's Humphrey, but actually Humphrey is in Asia. So I'm doing his inside story next week, and I am talking to Peter Tonkin, who is a historical novelist. And this takes us back to the world of Queen Elizabeth I, the very late Elizabethan years. And then next Friday, the 31st of March, I cannot believe we're at the end of March already, we are doing our book of the month, which is Away with the Penguins by Hazel Pryor. Really fun book, really easy to read, but also a beautiful book about a grandmother who decides she's going to go and out to the Antarctica to visit the penguins. It's a lovely life-affirming book. So please do read Away with the Penguins by Hazel Pryor and come along. And for those of you who are going to be with Humphrey for Book of the Month next month, he's choosing between two and he wants Goldster to decide. And we had at our Goldster Live on Tuesday a little bit of discussion. Is it Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, or is it the latest in the Richard Osman book trilogy, they're called The Bullet That Missed. Now, it's up to you. You can decide. Let me know perhaps next week in Book of the Month, and I will let Humphrey know. Thank you for your lovely comments, everybody in the chat. Just to say briefly that on PPG next Tuesday, I will be interviewing Rosie Stancer, who is finally back from her exploration, her expedition to the Sinai, and she's going to be talking to us about climate change, the things that she encountered living with the Bedouin, and wow, as we know, she is amazing. Emma, you've been a wonderful guest. Good luck with the next book. I hope it goes really well.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Come back and talk to us again in the future. It was a real joy to have you on.
Love to. Thank you. Bye. Bye.